Hi, everybody. My name is Helen Baskerville-Dukes. For those who don't know me, this is our first episode of On Point. First show, our inaugural show. I felt because we have the elections coming up soon, it was imperative to talk about politics and what it means to our community. So for our first episode, I'd like to introduce Kyle Bennett, Senior Director, Policy and Equity at the United Way of Rhode Island. Welcome, Kyle.
Thanks so much, Helen. I'm excited to be here for your inaugural taping and first podcast.
Yes.
I look forward to a lively discussion.
Okay. So do I. You know how much politics means to me. So we're just going to start off. I have some questions ready for you, and I'm sure you're ready to just,
chop it up.
Yes, exactly. So what are the key voting dates for the upcoming election in Rhode Island, including the presidential primary and statewide general election?
I'm so glad you asked. The first date is April 2nd. That's a couple of Tuesdays away. 2 Tuesdays away. And that's the presidential primary. That's when we get to vote in either the Republican or the Democratic primary for our presidential candidate. The second date is September 10th. That's our statewide primary where we vote for every single state representative, every single state senator, and certain mayors are also on the ballot and town managers. So there'll be a number of party folks around in September leading up to the 10th. And I'm sure we'll see them all out during the summertime knocking on your doors and telling you all the good things that they're going to do. But it's also a time when you can ask them what they've already done for you to make sure that they keep you at the center of their legislative agenda. And then the last race, the big one is November 5th.
Yeah.
That's the statewide general election. That's when we vote for the president, the senators, the state reps. We also have our 2 U.S. congressmen. The newest member, Gabe Amo, is up for re-election. He had won in a special election last year.
Yes.
He's up for re-election. And then Seth Magaziner, our senior congressman, who's only been on the job for 2 years, he's up for re-election. And Senator Sheldon Whitehouse is up for re-election. So every 6 years, the senators run for re-election, but this year is Senator Whitehouse's. So this election is a big election for a lot of reasons. April 2nd, September 10th, and November 5th. Those are the dates for the election. And if you can't be there on those days, we have early voting. So you can vote early. You can vote early in person. The deadline to apply for a mail-in ballot is already passed for the April 2nd election or primary. But you can apply for a mail-in ballot for the September 10th and the November 5th election dates.
Right. So voting early, is that across Rhode Island, or is it just
everywhere in Rhode Island? You can vote at your local board of canvassers. If you're not sure where that is, you can go to vote.ri.gov, or if that's hard, if you don't have access to the internet, you can give me a call at 211. Just dial 3 little numbers, 211.
I love it. I love it. You guys owe us for that,
We're always here.
Right. Okay. Well, that was a lot of information. I'm so happy. So on to the next. So can you explain the significance of the presidential primary and statewide general election in determining political leadership at both the national and state levels?
Yeah, the statewide primary in September is important because as what we call a blue state, most of the time our general election is determined in September, not in November. The majority of our candidates who win statewide office are Democrats. We've had Republican governors in our lifetime, but for the most part, they're Democrats, and that's determined in September. So if you don't vote in September, chances are the decision on who's going to be your next governor, lieutenant governor, general treasurer, attorney general, secretary of state, those decisions will have been made for you by the people who voted in September. The presidential primary is a chance for you to weigh in a way that allows you to determine who the Rhode Island candidate for president will be. On the ballot, there are 3 candidates for Democrats, and I believe there are 2 for Republican, and then we have independent candidates. But in the primary, if you want to cast your vote for the presidential candidate, you've got to do that in April in Rhode Island.
Okay.
We saw Super Tuesday happen a couple Tuesdays ago, where over 20 states make their voices heard on that one particular Tuesday. Well, our date to make our voices heard is 2 Tuesdays from now.
Yes.
April 2nd.
And I have my Obama socks.
I love it.
I can't wait to go vote. I know he's out, but still, if he could do it again, I would.
Well, he's out, but he's still around.
Yes.
And he's working this election because he knows that it's important for every vote to count and every voice to be heard.
I agree. All right, so let's carry on. All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
You're doing excellent. I love it. I love all this information. So how does the historical significance of Black people voting in the United States influence voter engagement and participation today?
Oh, that's a loaded question, Helen. When you think about this country, as great as it is, it was founded on the principle that you and I were not full humans. We were 3/5 of a human. And even when we agreed that we were both human, 100% human, we still weren't able to vote.
Right.
And at some point in time, the wonderful people in Congress, who mostly didn't look like us, but some did, they decided that it was important for me to be able to vote. And then 50 years after that, they decided that it was also important for you to be able to vote.
Right, the women's suffrage.
Yeah, so when we think about the importance of the Black vote, it's coming from a point in time in this nation's history where we weren't even considered human, to a point where not only are we human, but our vote counts as much as everybody else's vote. And when we fail to vote, we give up our power. Our vote is our voice. Our voice is our power. So when we exercise that vote, we're exercising our power. Just like when you go to the gym and you feel good, you've got a good pump on, you flex.
Right.
When you read the ballot, you know the candidates, you know the initiatives, and you cast your vote, you should flex then too.
Right.
I want to see some signs that say I voted on election day and all the primaries we have this year.
I wear mine every year. I get it and I believe it. And what I also do is I make sure I get to know the candidates as best as possible, singularly, because I want to hear what they have to say. And are they saying things to me that are not true? Because I think I'm an educated voter.
Yes.
Not to the point where I'm out here running for, an election, but enough to understand what particular roles, a senator or a representative or city council can do and cannot do. So I make sure that I'm talking to them and seeing if their goals and their values and what I believe they can do line up with mine or the community as a whole. Because when I go out to vote, it's just not for me. I have a family. Is this going to work for my family? Is this going to work for my community?
Yes.
So I'll move on. So how does, and one more thing, when you said our vote is our voice is our vote and our vote is our power. So just over in Pawtucket, a few years ago, she works for Stop the Wait. She lost by one vote. One vote.
That.
And she would have done an amazing job because she cares about the people and she wants to see, the city progress in Pawtucket. But one vote. So when we say our vote doesn't matter, it really does.
It does matter. And so many of these races, you mentioned city council and state rep and senator, so many of these races are won by less than 20 votes.
Yes.
So if you think you're running late, if you think you've got to get to work, you got to get home to feed your kids, we know you do. But the fact that you cast your vote has to be paramount on that day. And if you can't make it that day, you can vote early in person, and you can vote by mail in the statewide primary on September 10th and the general election on November 5th.
I agree.
And we keep saying those dates.
No, keep saying them. So what efforts are being made in Rhode Island to increase voter registration and turnout among Black communities?
There's so many things. There are literally dozens of organizations that we've partnered with at United Way. Some we've simply made an investment, and others we've been at the table formulating a strategy for years, going back to at least the 2010 census. We worked every 2 years on the general election to make sure that in communities that are underrepresented, communities of color, immigrants, people with limited English proficiency, people with disabilities and children with disabilities, these communities vote in the lowest percentage every 2 years. So our focus really has been working with organizations that directly connect with and impact these populations to make sure that everyone knows that their voice and their vote count. But in addition to that, we've also been working with our youth. And there are organizations like Young Voices, Providence Student Union, and they have a knack for engaging youth, but also for articulating policy in a way that directly impacts the youth. So if I think about having people with lived experience helping to shape policy in a participatory fashion, when youth are helping to design policy, when youth are creating engagement strategies for other youth, when youth are creating a plan to cast their vote, that's how I know we're winning. So we're connecting with populations in a way that helps to lift and empower, but also to support where they're already strong.
With the new laws in Rhode Island allowing 17-year-olds to vote if they turn 18 before the general election, how do you think this will impact voter demographics and political engagement?
Oh boy, I've been waiting for this for so long. Yeah. We've advocated for this particular law over the last couple of years, but in Rhode Island, when you're 16 and a half, you can register to vote. So when you get your license, if you don't drive but you want to register, you can register at 16 and a half. If you're 17 and you're going to be 18 by the November 5th general election date, you can cast a vote in the primary. You can cast a vote in the presidential primary that's coming up on April 2nd, and you can cast a vote in the statewide primary on September 10th if you're going to be 18 by the November 5th election day.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yes.
Wow.
So what this means is for people who've been dying to cast their vote, their first vote is going to be a presidential election. And our youth are also excited about lots of other things we've got on the ballot this year. We're going to look at, in the governor's budget this year, we're looking at state lunches to make sure that every kid who goes to school has the opportunity to have a nutritious and delicious breakfast and lunch. We're looking at transportation. We know that RIPTA is underfunded, but we have a challenge getting our kids to and from school, because if you live within a mile of the school radius, you don't actually have access to a bus.
Right, you don't qualify, right.
But if you live within a mile of school, you still have to travel through places that are challenging. So when we think about what's on the line, our youth are on the line, and they're ready to vote this year. So we're going to see numbers turn out in a large way from the young demographic. And at the same time, we know our traditional strong points in senior citizens, they're going to turn out, because there's some things revolving around Medicare and Medicaid that are on the chopping block, where Rhode Island may not be living into its promise, but we know the federal government also isn't. Medicare and Medicaid programs used to cover your medical needs at 100%, and now we have such significant copays that our seniors are finding themselves not only in the poorhouse, but losing their physical home, because the government is coming back to get it, even after they've died.
Wow.
So this year, I know that the election's going to be hot, because people are frustrated, they're looking for change, and they know that their livelihoods are on the line.
Wow. I didn't know that either. And I'm just so glad you came through to be able to educate us on some of these things. Well, at least me, on the things I didn't know, So this is great. So are there any specific initiatives or organizations in Rhode Island that are focused on educating and mobilizing young voters, particularly those from underrepresented communities?
Yeah, I would start with the NAACP. That organization, since its inception, has been one that's focused on mobilizing the power of the young people, leading the charge for change and equity. I would also look to some of our newer partners in the space, in the Divine Nine, the fraternities and sororities that are part of the Black Panhellenic organizations. They have galvanized their membership over the last decade to make sure that they're reaching into Black churches, that they're at Black businesses, that they are the voice that helps to educate people so that they know that their voice also counts, that their vote counts. And then I look again at our youth. They have been well organized, they're well informed, and they're engaging their youth in a way that I haven't seen in my lifetime. So I'm excited about those three different organizations, or buckets of organizations.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I know definitely with the sororities, it was because we have the deltas that it's part of Juneteenth. So, they make sure when we do Juneteenth, they're doing voter registration. Yes. But I also want to say, with the youth being able to register at 16, just as if they were going to get their licenses, it's perfect, because it just transitions them right into that, where it kind of makes the legwork easier.
It does, but it's not perfect. So we encourage people to look at their voter record, right? If you go to the website for the Secretary of State at vote.ri.gov, you can check your voter registration to make sure that your name is the same as the name on your driver's license, your state ID, that your address is the same, your city and town are the same. Because if you show up at the polls and those things are different than what they have on the record, you may not be able to vote. Or you'll be asked to cast a provisional vote, provisional ballot, which only counts after the election's over.
Okay. Well, I know mine. I've been voting since I was 18, so I know mine is correct, but that makes sense. So what role do local elected officials play in advocating for policies that address the needs and concerns of Black constituents in Rhode Island?
Yeah, that's a great question. At the local level or the municipal level, your city and town councilors, they are the legislative body. I know when I was a kid, we used to watch that video, I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill. And I started out on Capitol Hill, and the bill would go to the House of Representatives, and then if it passed there, it would go to the Senate, and if it passed there, it would go to the executive branch at the president, and the president would sign.
Right.
At the local level, we've got city and town council, so you have the legislative body in your city and town council where laws are created, and then you have the executive branch, that's the mayor or the town manager or the city council president in at least one community in Rhode Island, and they sign the bills into law or they veto. So when you think about implications for the Black community, you've got to make sure you know who your city or town councilor is. You got to know who your mayor or town manager is, and know that they're advocating for you because you're the expert in your life. There are other people who might be experts in medicine, might be experts in health, might be experts in lots of things, but no one is the expert in your life but you. So when you speak to your elected official at the local level, and they know more about your issues and your concerns, they can better represent you. And then the mayor, of course, can represent you at the executive level. The same thing happens at the state. We have the House of Representatives and the Senate, and you've got to get to know your representative, you've got to get to know your senator, and they've got to get to know you too. They count on your vote every 2 years.
Every 2
and if
years.
they're not representing you, you vote for someone else. You run for office yourself, or you support another candidate. You're not always going to win. When I think about the challenge of having a part-time legislature, they work 6 months out of the year on the books. They get paid or a stipend for 6 months out of the year, 3 days a week, and each representative has about 16 or 17,000 people they represent. Each senator has about 27,000. So I'm one voice, I'm one voter, but my voice has to count. They have to know what's on my agenda.
I agree. So just in case someone doesn't know that's watching, what does veto mean?
Veto is when the president says, you know what, that might have been a good law, but I'm not going to sign it. Or it might be a bad law, so I'm definitely not going to sign it. I've heard from my constituents, my voters, that that's not a good law, so I'm going to veto it. And by veto, it just means I'm going to cancel it out. And it doesn't get rid of it altogether. If the governor, the mayor, or the president vetoes a bill, it'll go back to the House or the Senate, and then they've got to have a supermajority or more than 2/3 of their constituency that votes for it again, and then it'll become law without the president's signature. So the president has some power, but it's not absolute.
Good. I'm glad you said that. And briefly, could you tell us what roles do city council, state representatives, and state senators play? And not just what they play. I mean, not just the roles they play, but what can you expect from them, just in a nutshell?
Yeah. When you have an issue that's impacted in your city or town, your city councilor, your mayor can be helpful there. Again, if there's something that's statutory, regulatory, or legal, the city council is the legislative body is where you should address it. And things, for example, I can talk about things like speeding limits. If we want to increase or decrease the speeding limits on our local city streets, the city council is where we would do that. The mayor would, of course, sign that bill into law, that ordinance into law, or veto it, but that's where we'd start. But if I'm talking about something like trash pickup or another municipal service, I go to the mayor's office because the mayor, as the executive or the administrator of the city, they oversee those duties. And the same thing happens at the state. If I have an issue on a state highway, I go to the governor's office as the administrator for the state. If I want to change the speed on the state highway, I go to the General Assembly and the House of Representatives and the Senate because they have the ability to change those speed limits.
Awesome. Okay. So how can we ensure that Black voices are heard and represented in the political decision-making process at all levels of government?
Oh, that's an easy one. It just involves your time. You've got to show up. When your city or town council has a meeting and you're there, they see your face, they hear your voice, they understand your issue. If you're not there, they never get to hear from you. And sometimes they might think that they don't have to be accountable to you.
I agree. Yes.
If you go to the State House, which is difficult, I know, you've got to find a place to park, you've got to go through a metal detector, you've got to figure out how to navigate that building, which isn't always easy. But when you get there, even if you don't testify, if you're just in the committee room and the legislators see you in that room, they know that they're accountable to you. But then when you have the ability to interact with them, when you testify, they know that they've heard your voice and that you're going to be represented. And when you find your representative and your senator in that building, they know that you're there, and they have to look again with a second or third eye to make sure that they're doing the right job by their constituents.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, they should know how our needs, not assume, but when we're there and we can advocate for ourselves, like you said earlier, and then we can see some things get done.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what steps can individuals and organizations take to support and encourage voter participation among Black communities in Rhode Island?
Three things. The first thing is, as I mentioned, check your own voter record. Go to vote.ri.gov. If you can't find that, you can't get on, give us a call at 211. Make sure that your information is correct. Make sure that you have a plan for what to do on primary day and election day and how you're going to cast your vote. The second thing, check with the people in your house. Sometimes we assume that our family members are going to vote, but we don't know for sure. Make sure they have a plan to vote and that their voter record is up to date. And as an individual or an organization in our community, talk about this every time you meet someone, whether it's in the supermarket, at the dry cleaners, at the playground. Make sure that they know the election dates are coming, April 2nd, September 10th, and November 5th, and that they also have registered, that they're up to date in terms of their registration, and they have a plan to vote.
Right. No, I agree. So what we do in my house is we go out and we vote as a family.
Yes.
So we made it a tradition, and I know, back in the day, especially when we had first had gotten the ability to vote, Black families would make it a family affair to ensure that everyone's vote mattered, counted, and.
And we do it, and we stick together when we do it.
Yes. And this is just cultural period. I know other cultures do it, but, we were just specifically speaking about Black communities. But I know that's what we do. But I do have a few more things to discuss, if that's okay.
Yes.
So from a historical perspective, how does an understanding of history of voting rights and voter suppression influence our approach to advocacy efforts today?
Oh, boy, that's a tough one. Again, we talked a little bit about our history in terms of not having been considered a human, to being a full human, to still not being able to vote, to being able to vote now, to making sure that we vote so that our voice counts, our voice is heard. But when I think about voter suppression tactics, every year we fight bills at the State House that try to increase density at the voting precinct in urban communities while we leave the density the same in the suburban or rural communities. My argument is always the same. If density is good, why isn't it good everywhere?
Right.
So when we see, it happens less and less in Rhode Island, but in other states, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, where we see people who are in line for 7 or 8 hours to cast their vote, we know that that's a voter suppression tactic.
Yes.
When you show up at the voter registration table and your name has somehow changed, even though you haven't changed your name, but on the rolls it's changed, or it's been deleted, we know that that's a voter suppression tactic. So the things that we can do are to make sure that we're working and we're vigilant to fight off any effort to change the law that would inhibit our ability to cast our vote in a timely fashion. We're asking for no more, no less, but the equality in our ability to cast our vote.
Well said. Voter suppression tactics. What are some contemporary examples of voter suppression tactics that disproportionately impact Black communities, and how can advocacy address these issues?
I think the biggest one, and I alluded to it earlier, is the purging of voter records. If you don't typically respond to your mail because you get mail electronically, you just don't check your mail, and the Board of Canvassers sends you an updated notice to verify that you live at the address that you're registered at, if you don't check your mail and you don't respond to that notice, they can purge you from the voter roll. So when you go to vote in the primary, you may not be there because you didn't respond to your mail. If you're like me and you don't get a lot of paper mail, I can see it easily when it comes through the mail slot because I don't get a lot of paper mail in my name. But if you do get a lot of mail, particularly junk mail, and you just happen to overlook this one piece and you go to vote, you may not be able to cast your vote that day. So that's why I say it's important to be aware of these tactics. And when you see it, address it right away. If somebody attempted to change your name or your address, correct that right away. If you found out that you were being questioned by the Board of Canvassers, make sure you let them know, yeah, I'm still here. This is still my home and my address. And then the last thing is, make sure you tell other people, because if it happens to you, chances are it can happen to someone else.
Right. Before my mother passed, one of the things that had happened is she had gotten some communication saying that election day was on a different day.
Intentional,
exactly. So knowing what day it is to vote,
absolutely,
matters as well as something you have to make sure you're informed, because you can easily be deceived.
And a good thing to know in Rhode Island is we always vote on Tuesday. If someone tells you to vote on Monday or Sunday and it's not early voting, you already know that they're trying to get you.
Exactly. So mobilizing Black voters. What strategies and initiatives have been effective in mobilizing Black voters and increasing their political engagement?
I think the most successful strategy, in all honesty, is educating and engaging our youth. When our youth go home, whether it's at the dinner table or at the kitchen counter, and talk to their parents about the election and to make sure that they're going to vote, parents listen. Nobody wants to be unresponsive to their kid, but they also want to make sure they're doing the right thing and setting the right example. And I remember years ago when the non-smoking or stop smoking campaigns came out, my younger sister came home, and my dad used to smoke at the time, and she said to him, "You're killing me," with secondhand smoke. And he looked at her in a way where I could tell he recognized the truth of that. He didn't smoke anymore.
Wow.
And I think the same thing is happening when kids go home. They don't have to tell their parents they're killing them. But if you're telling your parents that you're not being the best advocate by not voting, that you're not representing me well at the polls because you don't vote, and I don't have the ability to vote yet, parents listen differently.
Yes.
And then in addition to that, I think as organizations, sometimes we can help people to get out of their own way. You might not have a car, but you still have to get out to vote. So can we help provide rides? Do we have a call list? Are we checking in to make sure our seniors and people who live by themselves, who might not find the same sense of family commitment or tradition, that they also have that they're mobilized to cast their vote in the same way?
Yeah, and I think also we need to recognize how important it is to vote and how important our vote is. Because, when you hear about, my vote doesn't matter and things, of that nature, then essentially it's saying you don't matter. And you're regurgitating that just because it's what you heard. And sometimes you feel that way, like, hey, my vote doesn't matter. Well, the majority always wins, regardless. Yes. But knowing that you went and cast that vote that many people have died and were withheld from, then you have the power, like you said, and you were intentional about utilizing that. So one last thing, and then we're going to wrap it up. The power of the Black vote. How has the Black vote shaped local, state, and national politics? And what specific policies or issues are being influenced by Black voters?
Oh, wow. So I would say there's so many examples of where the Black vote has made a difference, but I'll use the most recent presidential election in Georgia, where people who hadn't voted in 30 years or 20 years re-engaged in the voting and electoral process and cast their vote, and they turned a red state blue.
Yes.
We saw the governor's race, the Secretary of State's race, the secretary who was running for governor and also running against Stacey Abrams in 2 races. We saw him have to certify or ratify the vote and attest to the fact that the process was legitimate, that Black people showed up and showed out, and they had an impact on that race. And we saw what happened with 45 when he said, let's find some votes so I can have won in that state. He said, I can't do it. They came out in such strong force that I can't pretend that the data, the facts that have already been certified are not certified.
The facts. Yes.
The facts.
Yes. And we did that.
We did that.
We did that. Can you say that again?
We did that.
Yes, yes. So thank you, Kyle, so much. I've learned some things here, and I just hope people who are watching have learned some things. You're very knowledgeable in this field, and I just thank you for the hard work you do out in the field, even when people aren't watching. and I'm glad to call you my friend. And we're on this battlefield fighting just to make sure that our communities are represented, they're heard,
Yes.
they're loved, and that we try to get them in a better situation than, and not just them, it's us.
Yes.
Put ourselves in a better situation than we are.
Yes, I appreciate it. And thanks for having me again. I'm excited about this inaugural podcast.
Yes,
and,
yes.
Hopefully I get to come back again.
Yes, absolutely. What else you got to talk about? Maybe you can come cook with me.
Oh, I love that.
You do?
I come from a long line of cooks. We sometimes we're bachelors, sometimes we're married, but always we're able to put food on our table and make sure it tastes good.
Yeah. See, my mom was a cook. I didn't. I hated it. My husband, he cooks for me, which is a huge blessing. But I want to just dive into shake this podcast up a little bit.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Kyle, so much.
Thanks so much for having me.